Back at it again with another Archetypes list. It's your boy Cody, and you're watching the Wondercat channel. Today we're going to be going over the current purple archetypes that exist in the game and how relevant they are. Don't really need much more of an intro than that, so let's jump straight into it. So we're going to start with set 1's archetype that's only gotten better over time, Serpents. Majuk was one of the poster childs of the game, literally on their opening posters, and would go on to shape set 3's meta with the addition of Shaz Snakes, getting even stronger with set 4's Ouroboros. Serpents are also able to keep up in hand advantage with the addition of Black Lance from set 1's promo set. Considering each set has more or less increased the power of the list, and purple having decent removal, the archetype has strong scales to slither on. Whilst a lot of the common to uncommon serpents are pretty bad, the rare slot is filled with plenty of value such as Hakuja, Botus, and Sculpione. Set 5 even introduced Dark Sculpione, allowing potential yellow mixes. Glutavolt alongside Ouroboros can make this sort of plan viable. The red-purple inclusions in set 5 also gave us Tyrantosaurus, who we covered in the Pterosaur part of red, is also a serpent card, just when I thought I couldn't like the card anymore. If you don't feel like going into the colour mixing route, you can always go old school and rely on curse effects to abuse Blood Curse with Majuk, an insane effect that would have been introduced in set 1. Serpents have established themselves well within the core of purple archetypes and is a strong archetype that can be built a multitude of ways, so it's placed in our second tier. This archetype is very close to being meta-defining just due to how universally strong the serpent shell is in most purple lists. On to Nightlings. Nightlings are an interesting archetype. The first Nightling boss monster we got was in set 3 with the printing of Nocturna. Sadly, she wasn't really a Nightling card and was actually one of the Sanctuary X-Rares that were released to promote the Sanctuary archetype, I guess. She does have Curse, so she could be run as a copy or two in Majuk lists with Sanctuary, as Amethyst Sanctuary had actually developed itself into an amazingly cheap value engine. Being able to invest one core into scrying on every spirit death during combat, not just yours, I guess it'd be more Surveil, not just yours, but every spirit death, allows purple to mill their relevant immortal spirits and control what you're drawing with Rotting Swamp or what you would be for next turn. Nocturna sadly didn't do anything for the archetype, at least until its saving grace appeared in set 4, Rixa. Whilst Rixa isn't a Nightling, it does require the ascend cost of a Nightling, which gave players the incentive to play Nocturna more. Weirdly enough, Devilish Prankster Imp is a cheap Nightling, but its effect cares about Shadow Spirits? I guess it was a product of set 1, since the Shadow archetype was pushed much more than in comparison to Nightlings. Costume Artist is probably the most relevant Nightling of the game's history so far, with play in most Shadow or Aristocrat purple lists. It was also played in Serpents as it had Curse and allowed easy Rotting Swamp triggers. It also ran well next to Ouroboros and Lamorak. Set 5 included our newest Nightling X-Rare, Uticata, a Skybinder. Yet again, another X-Rare that doesn't care about the archetype. Nightlings are an amazing niche little archetype, but are usually reserved for pieces of support in other shells like Shadows or Serpents. The deck has very little in terms of actual support, so it's going to be placed in the bottom rung of our tier list. If we get a decent Nightling exclusive card in future, Uticata may be an amazing inclusion that helps push the deck forward, but as it stands now, we just don't have enough to make anything decent with what is available to us. On to the Undead archetype. It's something I've been dying to get to work ever since set 2. Majuk is a Serpent Undead, and our favourite Bacillus Curse Dragon combo are both Undead spirits, but they weren't really part of an Undead deck, at least until we got Floating Grave, Great Whale, and Avarisha. Avarisha is more or less the deck's boss monster, being able to reanimate any Undead target from the trash, but it's when someone doesn't activate when it enters. Sadly, Grave Whale didn't really perform in testing, but we had an actual potential win con. Gravedigger Skeleton was also a funny inclusion, being able to reanimate a 2-cost or lower Exhausted. This allowed for easy deadly balance targets, usually comboing with the Purple Elemental, as you could cast it for free and throw 3 cores on it for the additional card draw when destroyed. Gemhead Pigeon, one of the promos is another consideration for this interaction if you wanted more undead targets to pitch with Morsdemon. Set 3 gave us another potential undead card, Skulpion. Certainly helped out with the archetype's curves, having a decent mid-range spirit, but ultimately didn't really impact the archetype. Set 4's release gave us the coolest inclusion to the archetype, Morsdemon. This card works in 2 archetypes, both Undead and the Voidlord, and helped the consistency tremendously, being able to pitch what you don't need in hand for reanimating later or discarding early Avaricia so it doesn't clump up your hand being a 10-drop. Set 4 also gave us Angel Falso, another X-Rare. I don't think I've seen any play of this card personally. The card is obviously meant to be played or abused with the card Reanimate, a magic, but I just don't like that shell personally. As every undead card seems to be, or needs to be seen through the ability of Avaricia being able to be summoned, Majuk just seems stronger overall than this, which loses half its value since you wouldn't be getting its when summon trigger. Set 5 introduced purple-yellow undead cards, nothing super promising in my opinion, outside the Dark Skulpion being printed, another undead serpent card. Set 5 also gave us a really cool supporting Nexus card, Dark Coffin Cavern. Whilst the undead archetype don't naturally run too much core control, the ability to pick off other spirits with 1 core when one of your undead is destroyed is a nice touch. All in all, undead have all the support they could ever want. Every set that comes out, I'm hoping the deck becomes good enough that it's playable. It has amazing synergies, plenty of cards that actually care about its archetype, with a decent boss monster, but the archetype just needs a proper win con, as Avaricia is just not consistent enough as a win con, especially with how easy he is to remove from the board. Undead make their way to the good but not great category. Good legs to stand on, just needs that little push before really becoming that proper threat. Ava 1 is actually a pretty large archetype, but I'm not going to spend too long on it because the chances it gets new support is going to be slim. Ava 1 has 2 different playstyles depending on how you want to build it. There's the Nerve path, and there's the Ava 113 route with Gendo and blue inclusions. Ava 1 is in Nerve, is stronger in my opinion with win cons like Pseudo Evolution to board wipe and swing for 2 safely, or Operation Yashima from the starter deck to ping people for 1 without having to actually land an attack. The Ava 13 lists lose access to yellow support cards and relies on the use of the Gendo and Kawaru Nexus, branching into blue for things like double entry. Double entry without Kawaru is mid at best, but a solid threat mid-game with it. Neither deck existed outside CBO1, so they realistically can't be judged on how they improved or changed over time. In a vacuum, CBO1 was well designed, and the large amount of purple in the set allowed these 2 playstyles to feel different. They have enough support cards that we can safely put them in the playable archetype tier, but without newer support in future, they're not going to age well like other archetypes. Shadow is probably the coolest purple archetype in terms of design. Undead spiritual knights in all black, not willing to die and usually generating value off dying. It's a really sweet flavor for an archetype. Starting back in set 1, Shadows were the second big archetype to be released next to Serpents, and some of the cards are still as relevant as ever. Aglavale, Cavalier, Beldegord, my boy, and Mordred made up a solid deck with the inclusion of Rotting Swamp. Even Camelot Knight would make an appearance in Serpent decks due to its free castability and curse effect. Dread Nemesis was the set 1 X-Rare for them, and whilst it was strong, it didn't match up to Majuk in the same way meta-wise, so things like Beldegor and Aglavale were used in other lists. Set 2 gave us an amazing addition in Lamorak, being able to sack things in the flash step, draw cards off Rotting Swamp, and having Lamorak return them to hand was a mainstay of Purple's meta in set 2. Sadly, the Shadow archetype was more or less hung out to dry until set 4, with the inclusion of Rixar, needing to ascend with a Nightling or a Shadow. His ability recurs 6 drops or less for free on attack. It's like a cheaper and easier to summon Avaricia, which is absolutely wild. This is why I say it. Undead just doesn't have that kind of win con. Sadly, both our bigger and cooler Shadow targets, Dread Knight and Palladian, 7 drops. Rix's effects were obviously to fuel Dread Knight's own ability and increase the board state, or you could look at it as bringing back your originally ascended target. The only relevant target is Percival to extend your board more by paying your soul core on summon to reanimate another target. Set 5 gave us a singular and somewhat underwhelming rare for the Shadow archetype, but it doesn't seem to make an impact on it as a whole. Lately, Dreadnought has made a bit of a recurrence in certain purple lists, but doesn't seem to be bringing his friends with him. Abandoned Guillotine is a Shadow support nexus and has seen basically no play from a competitive standpoint, as Shadows are the aristocrat archetype. Making them stronger with BP is generally not the right direction you want to go in. City of Shadows was printed in set 4 and is an interesting tech card into green, stopping our spirits from being exhausted during the opponent's turn. Considering most people will Thorn Prison or use Plan Trap during your turn, this Nexus seems like a pretty bad inclusion. If its either attack step clause was on both effects, I'd like it a lot more personally. So Shadow has kind of fell down a few steps. From prominent staples in set 1 to being almost completely ignored since set 2, the archetype isn't doing all that hot. The Shadow Knights gallop into the janky category. It has amazing highs, but some really bad lows, and it's missing some of the same support of better archetypes that are higher up in this list. Some purple honorable mentions. The Darklings, a very strange amalgamation of spirits that have little to no relevance. 4 out of the 5 cards are vanillas. There's nothing special about them. I do like a little slimy though. There are familiars. They have a little more support. Both Avarisha, morsdemon, and a set 1 All-Star Earth Spider Demon are familiars. Set 5 also gave us Oni Soldier, which, you know, nothing too special about him. He is a Skybinder. And Misa Glutvolt, who is also a familiar, which is interesting. As far as I'm aware of, morsdemon is currently the only card that actually cares about familiars. So we're going to have to see whether or not morsdemon will fit into a Misa Glutvolt deck in the future, possibly. We also have Netherines, which basically look like the purple version of Emperor Beasts. Again, 3 out of the 4 of them are vanillas, nothing interesting about them. And we have Spirit Beasts, another weird archetype, only a handful of cards, nothing noteworthy, sadly. So, purple has some great archetypes, and some pretty poor ones. The colour has always been great from a competitive standpoint, with removal like Deadly Balance, Doubly Deadly, Core Drain, and the like. The art is better than a lot of the other colours, at least in my opinion. The gothic nature of the undead, Shadow Knights, and scary snakes makes purple an appealing colour to play. I look forward to future sets buffing our Shadow Brethren and seeing more undead support that will make the archetype shine from the trash. Serpents heavily carry this colour though, and we're going to need to see some improvements with the other archetypes to even the playing field a bit. But that's it for purple today. Don't forget to slither over to that like and subscribe button. As always, let me know what you think about the archetypes, if I missed anything in particular. And I hope you look forward to sharing your love of yellow with me next video, because that's what's coming up next. This is Cody, and you've been watching the Wondercat channel. Ta-ta.